Please take your seat. We're going to move into the lunch program. Very excited about our next session. We'll highlight the work of Us Against Alzheimer's and our partners to bring more young people and young voices into the Alzheimer's movement and to create intergenerational solutions to this shared challenge. One of our great partners in this space, and one that is becoming a bigger and bigger champion in the dementia space broadly, are our friends at AARP. We're excited about our partnership with them across many different parts of AARP, but particularly with their multicultural team. And from that team, I want to introduce a good friend of mine, Dr. Nii Quartelai-Corte, Senior Advisor and LGBT Liaison, Multicultural Leadership, Community, State, and National Affairs. As a trusted strategic partner and community advocate, Dr. Nii Quartelai-Corte brings leaders together to build powerful networks of inclusion committed to a more fair and just society for all. As a current senior advisor and national LGBT liaison at AARP, he serves as a strategic advisor to the Senior Vice President of Multicultural Leadership, in addition to serving in a consultative enterprise-wide role charged with building national awareness and deepening community engagement to advance AARP's social impact agenda through an intersectional approach. And Nii Quartelai, I've gotten to know Nii Quartelai over the past 2 years. We're both Google Next Generation Policy Fellows, and I can tell you that he brings his justice, social justice and inclusion lens to everything that he does, and he makes everything we do all the more better because of it. Proud to bring up Nii Quartelai to the stage.
Good afternoon. I have a feeling that could have been a little louder if you weren't chewing. Thank you, Jason, for your leadership and for your friendship. Thank you to Us Against Alzheimer's. AARP, we are proud to sponsor this plenary luncheon. You know, last year when I was here, it was shortly after my great-uncle Ernest, who lives here in D.C., had a heart attack. He had a heart attack while mowing the lawn. Uncle Ernest is 89 years old, and you can't tell him to sit down or sit still. After he went to the hospital, they discovered that Uncle Ernest had lung cancer and prostate cancer. And Uncle Ernest has elected not to do chemotherapy treatment, and he's holding up pretty well. This is a picture here on the screen of Uncle Ernest and I chilling on the porch in recent days. He's doing well. But I often think, well, what if Uncle Ernest was a part of the LGBT community? Who would he turn to? What would be some of the unique challenges that he might have, being that he's unmarried and without children, and that a big part of his family lives in different parts of the country? And so earlier this year, we just so happened to commission a landmark study on the LGBT 45 plus community across the country. And here's an infographic here that really just summarizes some of the salient points from that research. We found that a number of folks are concerned about having to hide their identity in order to obtain suitable housing. We saw a great deal of concern around health care, and particularly among Black and Latino LGBT older adults. We saw evidence of compound discrimination, anxiety around compound discrimination. In other words, being discriminated against not just because of your sexual orientation, but also your racial identity. And so this research, which is available on aarp.org/pride, is publicly available and has informed how AARP is showing up on the community, state, and national level across the country. 2 years ago, 26 of our state offices prioritize LGBT work in their state plans. Now, as we sit here today, 39 of our state offices are prioritizing LGBT work, and this research has something to do with it. And so I urge you all to take a look at what we found. But being that this is Hispanic Heritage Month, and being that next month is LGBT Heritage Month, AARP wanted to do something unique along with our partners at Us Against Alzheimer's. We wanted to lift up some key insights from another report that we released earlier this year on millennial caregivers. See, the story of folks like my Uncle Ernest, folks in the LGBT community that are caregivers themselves or in need of caregiving, that's only half the story. The other half of the story is on the people that care for them. And we found that there's a substantial number of millennial caregivers. In fact, millennial family caregivers are more likely to care for someone with a mental health or emotional issue. Did you know that nearly 40% of Hispanic family caregivers are millennials? More than half of Hispanic family caregivers are men, and about 34% of Hispanic millennial family caregivers contribute over 20 hours a week to caregiving, more than any other group. These come along with their own unique challenges and opportunities. And so what we wanted to do during this lunch plenary is to bring the lived experience of Hispanic Latino caregivers and LGBT caregivers from the margins to the center. And so we have a terrific panel here today to speak to that, a panel of folks that are a part of the community and a panel of folks that are allies of the LGBT community. It's really important that we lift up the role that allies play in this work. And so I urge you to go to aarp.org/quidar or aarp.org/caregiving for more information on millennial caregivers to the extent that it may be instructive to your work. And then also, while you're at it, check out aarp.org/pride. With that, I want to turn it back to Jason to dig deep into this panel. And I want to thank Us Against Alzheimer's for being a dynamic partner with AARP. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that fantastic setup. I'll bring on to the stage our panelists. First, Lizette Cabral. Lizette is a Latinos Against Alzheimer's advocate and millennial caregiver for her father, Jose Cabral. Since her father's fight with Alzheimer's disease began, Ms. Cabral has dedicated her time to sharing her personal experiences and resources with families and caregivers. She's one of the folks that gives me hope in this movement. She's been so open about her family's journey from an immigrant experience and perspective, critical during these trying times. Next is Dr. Jean Axios, Vice President of the Long-Term Services and Supports and Livable Communities Group at AARP. Dr. Axios is a nationally recognized thought leader in aging, health policy, livable communities, and long-term services and support. He is Vice President of a Long-Term Services group within AARP. In this role, he provides strategic direction, leadership, and technical expertise to create and drive innovative policy solutions that raise awareness, foster meaningful dialogue, and spark action to improve the lives of millions of older adults and the families who support them. Next is Nihal Satyadev, founder of the Youth Movement Against Alzheimer's. We are proud to work with Nihal and co-convene the Youth Against Alzheimer's Coalition. Nihal is a social entrepreneur, biomedical research, and a leading millennial Alzheimer's advocate. In 2015, Nihal recognized that Alzheimer's disease will bankrupt Medicaid and Medicare within 2 decades. Noticing a lack of youth advocacy on this issue, he founded the Youth Movement Against Alzheimer's, a 501c3 based in California. To round out our panel, we have Haley Richmond. Associate Director of Puzzles to Remember, 2018 Prudential Spirit of Community National Honoree, and an amazing social entrepreneur. She's a fifth grader at Public School 78, and she's distributed more than 33,000 jigsaw puzzles in nursing homes and other senior living facilities over the past 3 years, and created an online support group for kids around the world who have loved ones suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Clearly, we believe in sparking an intergenerational conversation on this issue and to develop partnerships to advance solutions to the Alzheimer's challenge. We've done this because we look at the data, in part. We partnered with USC to analyze data collected by AARP and the National Alliance on Caregiving to better understand young people providing dementia care. And we found that of the 10 million millennials providing care in this country, 1 in 6 are caring for someone living with Alzheimer's or dementia. 1 in 6. Nearly 80% of those caregivers reported experiencing extreme emotional distress. 1 in 3 reported that their caregiving interfered with their work. 14% of those caregivers left the workforce entirely to provide the care that their loved ones needed. We were intrigued and a little disturbed by the workforce implications of this data. So we decided to dig deeper into this area of research. And just today, and outside, you'll see a new report that we've released on the role of workforce policies in supporting caregivers providing dementia-related care, and the role of policies like paid leave in supporting those caregivers. What we found was that just over a quarter of employed caregivers, 27%, and 4 in 10 employed millennial caregivers, 40%, reported either themselves or someone in their household needing to borrow money or to go into debt to provide care for their loved ones. And we found that access to policies like paid family and medical leave has a significant positive impact on the quality of care that they're able to provide for their loved ones living with dementia or Alzheimer's disease. We think that these numbers make it clear that young people have a stake in healthy aging and in the fight to cure and stop Alzheimer's disease, and that policy change is critical to supporting them. So we're excited to have this conversation today. We've partnered with all the folks on this stage and beyond to bring new voices into the Alzheimer's movement. And we're going to kick off with a short video to set the stage, a partnership that we have formed with the SCAN Foundation and features advocates like Lizette and others that are not here. Actually, I think Daisy is here, Daisy Duarte from Missouri. So with that, I'll kick it over to the video.
Millennials often get tagged as that selfie generation, very focused on getting their own needs met. That's simply not true. While they are trying to do all those things, they play a much bigger role caregiving in the lives of older adults than probably any generation before them, and they don't get any credit for that.
I'm Rachel. I'm 31 years old. I live in Kansas City, Missouri, and I'm a granddaughter. I began helping my grandma more and more about 3 years ago. She had a fall and landed in the hospital and spent quite some time there. And it was during that time I realized that my grandma was never going to return to the very independent, busy, active lady she was. I take care of her medications and make sure she has what she needs. I think that that's not only a good thing for her to not be in the hospital, I think it also validated the fact that I think I'm doing a good job taking care of her. I think that the greatest blessing I've gotten out of helping my grandma is being able to show her the love that she showed me.
My name is Martin Prado. I live in Springfield, Missouri, and I'm just a grandson who loves his grandma way too much. My grandma is your typical grandma. Every single day, 3 meals of the day, she cooked for us.
She was very loving, very caring.
2 years ago, she could walk, and she could kind of like form sentences, and like she would look at me and smile. I really didn't understand how precious our time was together. Things just got like really bad and she couldn't walk anymore, she couldn't feed herself anymore.
At that point, I needed help.
That's when I'm like, there's something that I have to do, because now more than ever, my aunt really can't do it alone.
He moved in and he went to school every morning. Without him, I wouldn't be doing half the stuff I do.
She's basically like my second mom and like my best friend all at the same time. Grandma was there for my mom and dad. Grandma was there helping us change my diaper, my sister's diapers. If she was there for us, we need to be there for her too.
I am Lisette. I live in Richmond, Virginia. I was definitely a daddy's girl growing up. He would go above and beyond to make me happy. When my dad was officially diagnosed, to see him decline the way he did, absolutely heartbreaking. My parents relied on my brother and I pretty heavily. I had to somehow balance my responsibilities at work with my responsibilities at home. It became pretty evident that he could not stay at home with us anymore. And once we made that transition to the nursing home, and I knew that I was going to be the point of contact, I quickly had to adjust. You're taking your lunch breaks to go see your father, then maybe after work you're going to go see your father again. It's been a pretty big learning curve for me. While all that was happening, I met my fiance Graham here in Richmond, and finding a partner that is willing to adapt to the responsibilities you have as a caregiver is a blessing.
Millennials have shown us that building community is incredibly important. And so we've built a campaign that focuses on building community. Our campaign, Do You Give a Care, is really about giving voice to the experience that millennials are having today.
Thanks to starting my blog, it really felt like for the first time in my journey with my grandma that I wasn't alone, that I had found some people that truly understood what I was going through.
Thursdays are my day, but Sundays are his day where he does whatever he wants to do, go to the movies, do whatever he wants to do with his friends.
When I learned that there were so many other millennial caregivers, I was just blown away. Because when I first started sharing my dad's story, I felt like I had no one to relate to. I give a care for my dad by sharing his story every chance I get.
Great. What a powerful way to start the conversation. And with that, Lisette, your story was featured prominently in not just this multimedia project, but several others that we've collaborated on. And you tell it with such power and such urgency. Why is it so important for you to take a stand through storytelling and advocacy?
Thank you, Jason, for having me. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisette Carbajal. I am a millennial caregiver for my father, Jose Carbajal, who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease about 8 years ago. To answer your question, Jason, when my father was diagnosed, I was a third year at the University of Virginia. I had just transferred. And when my mom called me and told me that my dad had been officially diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I vividly remember just breaking down and crying and thinking about all the memories my father and I shared, and at the same time realizing, or actually not realizing, what our family was about to face. We were not financially prepared, and at least for me, I was not emotionally prepared to lose my father at the age of 20. From that day forward, I knew that whatever, at least from college and onward, that whatever decision I made moving forward, whether that's taking an internship or figuring out the right major, that it would all have to line up to ultimately get a good job to help my parents. My parents, I'm a first-generation American. I'm the first one in my family to go to college, and so my parents relied heavily on not just my brother, but also not just myself, but also my brother, to really help them in this situation. And so I knew that coming out of college, I would be helping them financially and also being there as moral support. And I think about my experience in college and now as a young professional, especially in college, actually, I didn't have the support. I didn't have other friends. Well, at least I didn't know of other friends who were going through this. And seeing the momentum that has picked up around millennial caregivers really makes me so happy because, as I shared in the video, for many years I felt alone. I can share with you all how it affected my mental health, but we could probably save that for another time. But now seeing how much momentum has been built around this makes me so happy, and I'm hopeful that my story brings this data to life.
Great, thank you. And I think there's momentum, but there needs to be more and with greater urgency. And that's why we're excited to work with folks like Dr. Axios at AARP. And Jean, AARP has been doing more work to engage not just millennials, but other communities around the caregiving issue. Can you talk a little bit about AARP's research, and particularly research at the intersections of this issue? We learned this morning in our opening panel about the social determinants of brain health and how interconnected the issues that we're facing when it comes to LGBT issues, Latino, African American, and other community civil rights issues. Can you talk a little bit about what you found at the intersection of these issues?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for hosting such an important conversation. At AARP, we are not just excited about trying to bring to life many of the stories that you're hearing today, but also kind of thinking about exactly what can we do to help caregivers where they are. We released a report earlier this year that's specifically focused on millennials, in part because of the fact that being a caregiver can be a very invisible experience for many. But oftentimes what we find is the fact that there are so many different faces and experiences facing a range of caregivers. And how do we spotlight those? What our report found was the fact that there is roughly about 10 million millennials who are providing care. And to really kind of dive into that, what we learned is the fact that millennial family caregivers are the most racially and ethnically diverse population of caregivers relative to other generations. When we look at the data extremely more closely, what we find is the fact that 27% of all millennial family caregivers are Hispanic Latino, 18% are African American, 8% are Asian American Pacific Islanders, 12% identify themselves as LGBT. And then when you kind of go a little bit further, you say, well, exactly, what are some of the experiences, as Bruce indicated in his clip, to really kind of spotlight and bring the voice. What we found is the fact that millennials are doing very complicated medical nursing tasks, things like giving injections, wound care, tube feedings. They're also helping with eating and bathing and dressing. And they also are experiencing significant challenges in terms of the financial aspects of caregiving, as well as the emotional and physical implications of caregiving that we could get into. Last week, we hosted a dinner with millennial family caregivers, and some of the stories we heard were really pointing, again, bringing the data to life, that oftentimes this can be life interrupted. These are students who are going to college or having to stop. In one situation, a young lady talked about the fact that she had to stop working in order to take care of her dad, and when she tried to get back into the labor force, she experienced a lot of resistance from different employers, in part because they could not understand why there was a year gap in her employment history. So these are the type of experiences and challenges that we have to encounter, confront, and figure out the right ways in order to really support them. Millennials are also more likely to be working, but they are also making less income than other generations. About 34% are making less than $30,000 a year. And a significant amount of them are spending roughly about $7,000 of out-of-pocket costs providing that care. And if you're a Hispanic or Latino millennial family caregiver, those numbers are even higher. So we can have that conversation in a second, but we wanted to do this not only to spotlight the issue, but kind of think about what are those policy solutions, what are the things that we can do collectively to meet millennials where they are, because of the fact that there are some unique experiences and challenges facing the different groups that I just mentioned.
Great, thanks. And I think one of the leveraging data, like I said, collected by AARP that we analyzed with USC, we found that millennials of color providing dementia care are more likely to be the sole caregiver of their loved one living with Alzheimer's or dementia. So that's an intense emotional and physical responsibility to provide that care. And I think having unique resources for them is so important. That's why I'm excited to turn it over to Nihal, who's developing innovative solutions to support not just millennial caregivers, but all caregivers leveraging young people and their commitment to this movement. So Nihal, can you talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing and why you think you've been so successful in engaging young people? And shout out to the 3 tables of the youth movement that are here. Exciting.
Can we just have everyone here who's under 25 and passionate about dementia stand up? Just really quick. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the youth movement. Very excited to be back here. My name is Nihal Satyadev. A few of my friends and I founded this organization 3 years ago, and it's so heartwarming to see not only support from around the country, but also support from other generations like Mr. Wendorf here, who's rocking our shirt. And yeah. And I guess I wanted to focus today on 2 of the solutions that we're working on, both a caregiver respite model and also the legislation that model has inspired. In February of this past year, we launched our first pilot for youth care in partnership with USC School of Gerontology. And through that model, we train undergraduate and graduate student volunteers on how to work with older adults who have early to mid-stage dementia and then partner them up in a community-based setting. And this happens for 3 hours twice a week. And with that 6 hours, what we've seen in our grant-funded study is that 73% of family caregivers are saying that 6 hours leads to a very significant reduction in stress. And so for a few hours of a student's time, we're seeing massive health benefits to family caregivers. And in the flip, there's also benefits for other members in this model too, right? For the student, this is a unique opportunity on how they can have an impact on the field of Alzheimer's and aging. And for the person who has dementia, it's a unique opportunity to have purposeful aging by giving them a mentor who they can guide through their early career and through college. But in addition, the ability of providing caregiver respite has a tremendous benefit, I think, at scale to our healthcare system. Because if we can lower the burden of care for family caregivers, we not only reduce the need, the burden on mental health services, but we can also increase aging in place. And so if we can extend aging in place using this model or any other model by 2 months and scale that model to help 1% of people in America who have dementia, that's a healthcare savings of $1 billion. And so there's, I think, tremendous potential for young people to be doing this work. And so rather than wait for our model to scale, we decided to pursue legislation that makes an impact on a wider scale. So earlier this year, we introduced the California Care Corps Act, which takes these same kind of benefits but positions them in the same model as AmeriCorps or Teach for America by incentivizing young individuals after they graduate high school or college to provide 1 year of full-time non-medical care, and upon completion of that program have subsidies that they can use towards their student loans or towards graduate school funding. And if they continue on in the field of health, the funding for them is even higher. So it's really meant to also be a workforce development program. And the great benefit about this model, I think, speaks directly to what you were saying just a few minutes ago about workforce. You know, with so many people dropping out of the workforce, if you're provided that 40 hours of care, you can go back into the workforce, which means benefits not only for the economy and state taxes and all of that, but for these individual families that might need this funding to provide for care later on. So I'm really, I think everyone here knows the magnitudes of the problems we're facing with the prevalence of this disease doubling in the next 12 years. We're looking at a straight shot of bankruptcy of our healthcare system. But right now is not the time to settle. Right now is the time to work across generations. Right now is the time to create solutions that have never been done before. And together, we can create a future worth remembering. Thank you.
And so two important points that Nihal brought up. One, the importance of supporting caregivers and driving down emotional distress. We also think that if caregivers are better supported, they'll better utilize available services. They'll better be able to participate in things like clinical research and clinical science. So I think that these issues are very much interconnected. And some good news on the legislative front. The California Care Corps is modeled off of a national care corps introduced 2 sessions ago by Representative Michelle Lujan Grisham, chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. And it looks like this year, as of the fiscal year 19 budget, which will be passed any hour, any day, $5 million will be included in that to do a demonstration project of that. So as we gather evidence to implement that program nationally. So that's really good progress there. And so next up, Haley. I'm usually the youngest person in a room talking about Alzheimer's in DC, but today Haley has us all beat. Haley, can you tell us your story and what brought you into the Alzheimer's movement and what you're doing to bring more young people into it?
I just want to say thanks. My name is Haley Richmond, and when I was 4 years old, my grandmother developed Alzheimer's disease, and I was really heartbroken. So me and my mom were trying to find support groups, and there were a lot of support groups for adults, but there were no support groups for kids. So that's why I founded Kid Caregivers, which is a support group for kids by a kid. And it gives tips, ideas, and suggestions to kids who have loved ones with Alzheimer's disease. My second organization I am the associative director of, and it was founded by Max Wallach. It's a 501c3 charitable organization, and what it does is it distributes and gives puzzles to facilities who have people with Alzheimer's disease. We have donated over 30,000 puzzles to over 5,000 facilities. I have a puzzle with me today, and most puzzles that have small amounts of pieces, because people with Alzheimer's disease can't solve puzzles with 500 pieces. So most puzzles that have 36 pieces would have pictures of like Minnie Mouse. And somebody with Alzheimer's disease, just because they have Alzheimer's disease, doesn't mean they want a little kid picture. I mean, it'd be embarrassing to be solving a puzzle. So Puzzles to Remember has puzzles that have adult themes to them. Like, for example, this one has a flag and a bicycle. And the reason why we do puzzles is because puzzles stimulate the visual cortex inside the brain. And they relax and exercise you. So, yeah.
Amazing. Standing ovation. Okay. So there's an amazing spectrum of folks really joining the movement, and I think it's because of a greater understanding of the challenge. You've learned a lot about that today, and it's going to take all of us, hence our name, Us Against Alzheimer's, to develop solutions. Gina, before we turn over to Facebook, we have some folks have questions from the Facebook community. We're talking a lot about the intersectionality of caregiving and sort of that young people have a stake in this, Latinos, African Americans, other communities of color have a stake in this. AARP is really led, particularly in looking at the LGBT community and how they're dealing with this. There's a community that's dealing with a lot at the intersection of aging, discrimination, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about that work?
Absolutely, and there's a lot of resources that we've created through our AARP Caregiver Resource Center that's available either for first-time caregivers, for those who are caring for someone with dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And then one of the things I would also say is that there's tips and strategies in terms of self-care. Oftentimes when we talk about and think about caregiving, we forget to take care of ourselves. And it sounds great, but the question is, how do you actually do that and not actually feel guilty in the process? So there's a lot of resources that are available on our Caregiver Resource Center. We have also been working very closely with our colleagues in MCL, which is our multicultural leadership team, both in terms of Hispanic and Latino, as well as with LGBT, to kind of think about exactly how do we create meaningful solutions that actually meet the needs of different caregivers, especially where they are. And more important, to know that their stories matter, that we're really doing a deeper dive. And part of that actually takes into account several different things. One is our Prepare to Care, or our care guide. How do you actually start having these conversations around caregiving in a way that is actually meaningful to the caregiver as well as the person who needs the care? What are the strategies that you need to employ in order to be able to have that respite, or to be able to take care of your loved one? Getting at the intersectionality of being a caregiver, we know from the work that we've done with caregivers is the fact that when you look at the number of caregivers who are working and who are performing 21 plus hours of care, it's just disproportionately higher for Hispanic, Latino, for LGBT, for African Americans, and others. So these are individuals who are not just working, oftentimes 40 hours a week, but then they're doing a part-time job, in some cases a full-time job, being a caregiver on top of that. So how do you balance that? What does that balance actually look like? And again, how do you meet the caregiver where they are in a way that says, I hear you, I see you, and what you have to say actually matter? And that is what we're doing as an organization, is to have those conversations, but also provide those tools. Because I think at the end of the day, what really matters to an individual is the fact that you actually see them and you actually hear them, and that there's no one size that fits all. As I indicated before, there's 10 million family caregivers who are millennials, each one with their unique experiences, situations. So how do we get our health systems, our providers, our social workers in our community involved, engaged, and aware of what the experiences are? And I think that this is what's so important about this conversation today, because the solutions are going to have to be cross-sector. It's going to have to be from the public. It's also going to be from the private. At AARP, as part of our 60th anniversary, we recently announced that we were dedicating $60 million to a Dementia Discovery Fund. Because what we have heard repeatedly from our members is the fact that the loss of memory, the loss of cognitive decline, dementia, is something that they really want us to address. And that crosses all age spectrums. So this is something that we're really excited about, and we'll continue to want to partner with and engage with all of our different stakeholders and organizations to really develop those solutions to really meet caregivers as well as the people that they're caring for where they are.
Great. And we're going to turn it over to a question from our Facebook audience.
This is on. Hi. This is from Kate Bailey Rooney. She's from North Carolina. They ask, I was 18 when my dad was diagnosed, and it was a really difficult and isolating experience. No one was really talking about it back then in terms of younger generations. What is one thing that organizations dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia could do to better help reach younger generations?
Great. I think that's a great question for Nihal and Haley. We'll start with Nihal.
Sure. Hi, Kate. Kate's actually reached out to me before, so good to see her question out there. I think it's about having younger people innovate in their own way. I think every single person in my generation, in our movement, has their own reason for why they're invested in this. And we look to established organizations for that mentorship and that support. For example, Us Against Alzheimer's has been tremendous in helping us create this coalition. LEAD has been tremendous in helping us get all of our chapter leaders out here. And with that support, we can go back and help our peers and raise awareness through simple advocacy events. For example, one of the things we do every year is our chapters create a memory wall on their main chapter or campus plaza. So it's this big poster board where anyone can come up and put their favorite memory their favorite memory up on this wall, and it helps them remember that this is something that they might not have if they were to have cognitive decline. And so just helps them put themselves in other people's shoes.
Just like Nihal said, fundraisers help a lot, and I think what's good about having your own organization is that you can customize it, and it can actually feel like, for youth, if it's by a kid for a kid or it's by a teenager for a teenager, it's actually direct to them because they're dealing with the same experiences that they would have versus an adult and a teenager.
Great. That's a great point, and I think that's something that we believe heavily in and proud to partner with Nihal and with others, Hilarity for Charity, as well as part of the co-conveners of that coalition. Lizette, from the perspective of someone who's navigated this system as a young caregiver, what do you wish you had known then, what that you know now?
Honestly, how expensive the services would be. At the age of 20, I had no idea how expensive it would be to have a CNA come to our home, how much nursing home care or a nursing home would cost annually. It exceeded my family's annual income. And when we realized that we did not have the funds to pay for my dad's care, navigating through the Medicaid system was a horrific experience. We ended up qualifying, thank goodness, but we thought that maybe our troubles would end there, that we finally have these services, but it didn't, because at least for my father, who speaks very little English, he only speaks Spanish now. It was difficult to find a CNA who spoke Spanish, a nurse who understood our culture. And then when it was time to send him to a nursing home, it was difficult to find a Spanish-speaking nurse there too. I wish I would have known how to better prepare, not myself, but also my family, because I felt this duty to take care of both of them as they had all their lives for me. And so I wish I would have known the financial awareness, the financial aspect of caregiving and how it would impact my family also from a mental health standpoint. I mean, my mother was his full-time caregiver at home, and I would drive back on the weekends when I was in college to give her time off, but that time off really wasn't any time off per se. She was emotionally drained Saturday through Sunday. She wanted to go out, but she didn't want to go out by herself, so I was staying at home taking care of Dad. So at the end, she was just hanging out with me and Dad. It wasn't really a break for her. I don't think even now, while Dad is at a state hospital receiving care, it's a break for her, because we constantly think about him. I think about my father when I wake up and when I go to sleep, and I think about him constantly throughout the day. And speaking of feeling guilty, of like how do you take care of yourself and not feel guilty as a caregiver, it is almost impossible not to feel guilty. But yeah.
I think those are such important themes around mental health and the different ways that we support young people and others providing dementia care. We found in the USC report that over half of millennial dementia caregivers reported not only emotional distress, but the inability to access resources that were tailored to them to alleviate this emotional distress. What was helpful to you when you were doing, in terms of feeling supported? Who did you turn to? What institutions in your community did you turn to, if any?
I'd like to say that I've had different, I've been in different positions and jobs throughout my dad's diagnosis, and I was very open to my colleagues, to my managers, about what I was experiencing. I was hesitant at first because as a young professional, you're trying to excel, you're trying to move up, and so you don't want to make any excuses as to why you didn't show up on a Monday or a Tuesday. But being upfront about it, that within itself, upfront with my coworkers and my manager, really helped create a community, because I had moved about an hour and a half away from home, and I didn't have anyone in Richmond, Virginia. And so being able to tell them and say, hey, I need to go home, Dad was found wandering, they didn't say no, they didn't say, I'm sorry, but you have to attend this meeting. They said, drop everything, go. And I think with that, it gave me comfort that I wasn't alone. I was a young professional, still am, but I'm fortunate to have had that support within the companies and organizations that I've had the privilege to work for.
Great, and I think that's an important next frontier in better supporting millennials and all caregivers is the role of the employer. And you please do read our new report on paid leave. It really points out the importance of supportive workforce policies to improve the quality of care and that support for caregivers. We have time for about 2 questions from the audience, so we'll turn it over to the audience. I have one right here.
How you met Max Wallach and how you heard about the puzzles.
Okay, so my mom reached out to Max Wallach. My mom is over there. Because they met through, I think, Alzheimer's reading group somehow. Yeah. And then she told Max about how I was caring for my grandmother. And Max in 2007 made his organization Puzzles to Remember. And he told me about it, and I think he sent us some puzzles, and I started solving them, and then that's how I met him.
Was that in Boston?
What? Max? Yeah, he lives in Boston.
Right.
I live in New York.
And what's your Twitter? No, I'm just I have a question over here.
Haley, I would love to have a daughter like you. Honestly, that's good that my children are not with me.
I was going to say,
today.
Constantina's daughter's not here, but she's watching on the Facebook Live.
Yeah. Well, I want you to tell me what would you say to other children on your age that are facing something unexpected, like your grandma or your grandpa is suffering from this horrible illness. How they will understand? You understand because you are super smart. But what about the regular children?
Thank you. I would say there are ways to cope with this disease. And you are not alone. That's why I founded Kid Caregivers, so kids will get tips. They will not be alone. And there are ways to deal with this disease. And right now there's no cure, but you could still cope with the disease. And all Kid Caregivers out there should know that there are ways to deal with it. Just go into their world and do what's right.
Wow. Words to live by. I think that that you are not alone. I think that's something that both with AARP and the work that we've done with USC, the data shows that not only are young people dealing with this not alone, but they're growing. And as the numbers of projected Alzheimer's cases grow, more people like Haley, and even younger than Haley, will be put in this position. So one, it's knowing that you're not alone, but how do we connect? And that's why we're proud to work with Nihal, AARP, and storytellers like Lizette and Haley to really bring to life those numbers and start to drive action to connect these folks. So thank you so much to our panelists for joining us for this conversation. We hope it's the beginning of a longer movement and effort to diversify the Alzheimer's movement, and we look forward to working with all of you to do it.